Good morning, everybody. Amy's muting her computer so we don't get feedback. Okay, we're going to give it just a second. It's about 8:59 right now. We will start here in just a minute. My name is Kara Polai. I'm going to be the presenter today. I do have Amy Hammond with me in the chat and questions box. So if you have questions, please put those in the questions box and Amy and I will get those answered. Our topic this morning is housing tax credit properties after the federal compliance period. So what we're talking about today are the tax credit developments and programs that have gone post-15. So you've completed the federal compliance period. And we are going to go through the nuances that kind of come with that. There are handouts that are in the handout section of your GoToMeeting toolbar. But those handouts were also emailed to you if you registered before this morning. You got them yesterday. If you registered after about 1 o'clock yesterday, then you would have gotten those this morning. So hopefully everybody has those. You can follow along in the webinar and go back to the handout for reference, or you can take notes however you want to use this time. And this will all be made available on our website, probably end of next week is when I would anticipate having this posted. So without further ado, let's get started. Again, my name is Kara Polai, and we are talking about housing tax credit properties after the federal compliance period. The department contact information, if you ever need to mail us something, please use that PO box. If you want to come downtown and see our beautiful building, it is that 221 East 11th Street. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be a little underwhelming, but we are right across the street from the state capitol. So if you're downtown, you can at least come see and wave at our windows. We do have a website that is relatively new. Hopefully everybody has already saved that to their favorites and started to get acclimated with that. Amy will put some of the links from that pertain to different things from the new website into the chat box. So you can get those, but they're also available in this handout. If you need to call the Multifamily Compliance Division, you can call the 8869 number that you see there on your screen, and you can ask to speak with a monitor, or you can leave a voicemail in our general mailbox and it'll get forwarded to one of us so that we can return your call. If you need to call the department and you want to use a toll-free number, you can use that 1-800 number there at the bottom. That is toll-free in Texas only, though. A little bit of housekeeping this morning. The way this is going to work, for those of you that have not attended one of our office hour webinar combos, we're going to talk about the post-15 housing tax credit stuff from 9 until about 10:30. And then we will shift into an open forum question and answer session, and a few more staff members are going to join us. So if you are here for the post-15 talk, great. If you are here for the open forum stuff and you're not really concerned about post-15, you can mute us or come back at 10:30, or you can hang out with us. Never a bad day to learn something new. We will take a quick break when we shift gears so that I can change PowerPoints and Amy and I can, stand up and do a lap around the table real quick. But we will it won't be a long break. So and then we will stay on to answer questions until about noon today. There are no certificates for these mini webinars that are held in conjunction with office hours. You will get an email that says, thank you for attending. We appreciate you joining us. And you should get that within 24 hours of the end of this meeting. You may want to check your junk email folders for that. I'm not able to reissue emails. So if you don't get one, or if you did not use your link to join the webinar and you you don't get one of these emails, or you get the, hey, we're sorry you didn't join us today, then you are going to want to adjust how you do that for future presentations, because if you don't use that link, you're not going to get the correct email, and I don't have a way to adjust that or to send that out after the fact. We rely on the GoTo platform for this. I would encourage you to silence your phones and put it out of office, especially just for this webinar presentation part, so that you can get the most out of it. This is a great resource for you guys. We are offering these because a lot of our housing partners wanted more information and wanted some, more opportunities to ask questions about very specific topics. You can put all your questions in the questions box, and then Amy will put some resources in the chat box that you should be able to copy and paste. But all the resources will be listed in this PowerPoint as well. Some resources just to kind of kick it off. We've got our compliance forms section of our website with all of our forms, application, all of the things that you would use. The manuals and rules are listed on the link you can see there, and that's going to be a link to the tax code that governs the tax credit program, the TIN-TAC, the utility allowance statute, all those things that kind of go hand in hand with these programs. The income and rent limits are available on our website as well, and if you have not run those yet for this year, that needs to be kind of top priority after this, because those did change back in, I believe it was April, for the tax credit program. So you're probably going to want to look at that income and rental if you haven't already. If you have already, then you've seen how that changed. And we're going to look at an example of that towards the end of this presentation. We do have a website for our training opportunities, and that is where, if we're going to have an in-person training at the department, you would register for those there. And then all of our presentations are shared on that presentations link you can see there as well. So that's a good resource if you think, oh my gosh, I don't need this right now, but I'm going to need it in the future, or you go post 15 in January, and then in January you're like, wait, I attended that training, but I don't remember what's going to happen. This is going to be posted there, and so that'll be a good resource for you. If you need to contact somebody but you're not sure of their contact information, you can go to that compliance division staff list, and that's going to have the subrecipient monitoring folks, the compliance monitoring folks, and the physical inspection folks. So that's going to be a list of kind of everybody you would deal with from our division. With regards to the requirements for housing tax credit properties after the federal compliance period, the information can be found in TIN-TAC section 10.623. You can find that at that link there. That is also saved in the handouts that are in your GoToMeeting platform. You should be able to access those. If you can't, you can go to that link, or you can email me or Amy and we can get you to that link as well. This is commonly referred to as going post 15 or post 15. Nobody will go post 15 in August of 2024. The post 15 transition would happen. The last day of the federal compliance period would be a December 31st date. So post 15 would start January 1. So you can always remember it's going to be the end of the year. And if you are not sure when your property goes post 15 or when you went post 15, you can reach out to a compliance monitor and we can look that up for you. The federal compliance period is the first 15 years of the affordability period. And some properties, compliance period starts when they are placed in service, so the same year they're placed in service. Some owners elect to begin the compliance period the year following placed in service, and that's an accounting function decision that's made when Forms 8609 are put together and issued. And if you are not sure what your Forms 8609 look like for this section, please reach out and we can walk through those on a property-specific conversation. So the first 10 years are the credit period, and that's when the actual tax credits are broken down. There's a whole bulk sum. It's divided by 10. That's how that part works. And hopefully anybody that's on this has also attended our housing tax credit training, where we dig in a little bit more. If you haven't and you want to, we have one at the end of August through the Texas Apartment Association. The first 15 years are the federal compliance period, and that's different than an extended compliance period that is prescribed in your land use restriction agreement. What this is the federal compliance period. There is a minimum affordability period of 30 years, and some of the land use restriction agreements extend that. I think we have 2 that are like 65-year affordability periods. So Amy and I will probably be long gone by the time that those come to fruition. But for now, everybody's, just chugging along through this affordability period. Your LURA is going to tell you how long these things are, and so that is going to be a key piece, and we're going to look at some examples of that. So what we're talking about is the remaining affordability period or the extended affordability period after the first 15 years. The land use restriction agreement is going to indicate the compliance period length, and we're going to look at where the LURA is going to show that. If the LURA does not have this section that we're going to look at some examples of in the next couple slides, then you probably just have a 15-year compliance period and a 15-year additional period for a 30-year affordability period. You don't have any extended affordability period requirements. The LURA is also going to tell you if there's a longer compliance period or a longer extended use period, or if there's just the 30 years. If you are not sure what is required from your LURA, please reach out to a compliance monitor and we can help you find this. Here is one of our newer-ish versions of the land use restriction agreement. I think this version's been around for quite some time now, so it's not as new as maybe it once was. But you can see there where it says there's a longer extended use period and there are 5 years added to the end. So the compliance period is still 15 years. And then there's a 15 years additional with 5 years added to that for a total of 35 years. So this one's very clean. It tells you very detailed. You have 15 years plus 15 years plus an extra 5. So you don't have a longer compliance period in this case. Some things that change with compliance monitoring after the property goes post 15. Compliance monitoring fees continue to be submitted to the department annually as stated in the LURA. But now the department is going to monitor the total number of low-income units development-wide. We're not going to look at building-specific applicable fractions. So if you're supposed to have 13 market units and 87 low-income units, we're going to make sure that property-wide you have 87 low-income units. So now it's going to shift a little bit from what we were doing when you were in your federal compliance period. You still are not allowed to charge for amenities that were included in the development's eligible basis. So if your eligible basis included the paving and establishment of your parking lot, you cannot now charge folks to park in said parking lot. You would have to have had that excluded from eligible basis, and that's something that's going to be outlined in the cost certification and potentially, using the Forms 8609 as backup. That should be something that your ownership group is aware of. Employee units are still going to be treated as prescribed in section 10.622 If you are a development with market units, you still need to put your employee units in a market unit because that is still going to impact your compliance with regards to your required number of low-income units. Additionally, if you're 100%, you can still have an employee unit as long as you're not layered with something else that would prevent it. You could still have an employee unit in an exempt unit. The file monitoring is going to be based on frequency and depth based on risk assessment. That is also going to be different if you are layered with something else. So if you are a housing tax credit property that's gone post 15, but you also have another program like NSP or home, we are still probably going to come out more regularly than we would if you were just tax credit post 15. Physical inspections are going to remain on a 3-year rotation, so that piece will not change. For physical inspections, we're going to look at 10% of the low-income units, not less than 5, but not more than 35 of the housing tax credit units will be physically inspected to determine compliance with INSPIRE protocol. INSPIRE started in March, and I believe they are working on a training that'll go out later this year, so there'll be some communication for that. So if you are interested in a training on the INSPIRE protocol, you can watch those listserv announcements that'll be released, or you can stay on with us for the open forum office hours. Our manager of physical inspections is going to be with us, and he loves to answer questions about INSPIRE protocol. All building systems and exteriors are going to be inspected. Post-15 developments need to continue to ensure that the development's accessibility standards are continually met. So you can't just block off all your ramps. You can't change how your stairs are developed. You can't change handles if they were accessible before and now they're not. You've got to maintain those requirements just like you would have during the federal compliance period. All developments with 4 or more units in one building constructed for first occupancy after March 13th in 1991 must comply with the FHA standards. If you have more questions on physical inspections after you go post 15, in my thought process, the physical inspection side of it doesn't really change. You still have to maintain safe and sanitary housing, and you still have to maintain those building systems and exteriors and stuff. So but if you do have questions on that, we can always get you in touch with one of the physical inspectors and they can help further with that. Are there any questions so far, Amy? Okay. So the next thing that continues to be a requirement, even if you go post 15, is going to be the reporting requirements that are outlined in the TIN-TAX 10.section 10.607. If there is a change in management or ownership, it still has to follow the correct processes. So you still may have to do a filing agreement if you need to get somebody else with CMTS access, which is our compliance monitoring tracking system, which is the online forum that we would use to, or that you would use to complete reports and submit documentation and all of that sort of thing. If there is an ownership change, it still has to go through the appropriate processes for an ownership change. So you can't just decide you're going to change the ownership and, you know, make that change without the department processes being followed. The annual owner's compliance report, or the AOCR, is still a requirement. Also, that was due April 30th. If you did not get that done, you have now probably received a couple of our notices of non-compliance for this. That should probably be a priority for the day or for the week for you to get that completed. There's several parts to that, and so that's going to be an important piece to make sure you're still completing by April 30th of every year. There are periodic unit status reports that remain as a requirement. Those are due quarterly on the 10th of the month in January, April, July, and October. So if you did not do your July 10th report, I would go ahead and do that today so that we can show that as completed. That helps us know kind of what's going on in the world. That helps make sure that everybody has accurate information so that the vacancy clearinghouse website works properly. And if we get complaints or tenant calls, or if there is a natural disaster like the hurricane that happened earlier this month, you know, that is helpful for us to be able to say, oh, well, these are updated and accurate. You want to make sure you are still maintaining current resident data on the unit status report. Don't just say, oh, I'm post 15 now, I'm not going to fill this out until they tell me they're coming back out to monitor. You're going to have a lot of catch up to do at that point. So what I used to do as an on-site manager is I'd set everything that happened during the week, my move-ins, my move-outs, and my renewals, and I'd go in on Friday afternoons or Thursday afternoons, and I would update the unit status report. That is not a requirement of the department. That is just something that I used to do, and it worked well because it meant that every week our unit status report was up to date. Anytime there is a monitoring review or a physical inspection, you are still going to be asked to submit a current unit status report so that we know what units are occupied, and we can kind of confirm rents and requirements as far as renewals and all of that. So you want to make sure that you're not just updating households, but you're updating rent changes, you're updating anything that might be going on with those households that would impact the unit status report. Then there might be other items that are requested from the department that you're going to need to have updated as well. So if we upload a request into the attachment system in CMTS, or if you get an email request or something like that, you're going to want to adhere to those as well. And just a little plug for our Fair Housing Group, if they upload something into CMTS, please make sure you are responding to them. We see quite often that they are requesting stuff and people are not responding. And then that they loop us back in, and then we have to follow the corrective action and referral processes for those as well. For post-15 developments, you still have to qualify your households. All housing tax credit households must be income qualified upon initial occupancy of any low-income unit. Your rents have to continue to be restricted for all of your low-income units. Your utility allowances will have a shift. Utilities paid to the owner are now accounted for in the utility allowance, even when they're based on an allocation method. So if you had allocation utilities, like for water and sewer, that were a mandatory fee before you went post 15, and now they are going to be part of the utility allowance, that is a shift that we probably need to talk about before it happens in order to avoid non-compliance. All designations remain in effect. So if you have to have 30%, 40%, 50% units, in addition to your federally required 60% units, those are still in effect. So you still have to have those. So you still get to move them throughout the property, but you don't get to just say that, oh, well, everything's at 60% now. That is not the case. If you had lower set aside or lower designations required, you still have to meet those. Did we have a question come in?
Yes.
Is this a good place for it?
Yes. Why does the utility allowance have to be updated to the new UA on the USR every time it changes, instead of just having the UA in place at the time the certification is effective?
So the only way that we know you have implemented your utility allowance is to review the unit status report. Our rule requires that in order to implement a utility allowance at the time of a change, the unit status report is updated. We do not have another mechanism to adjust that. And this is going to be one of those things, if your utility allowance goes down and your rents could potentially increase, we have to be able to, at the time that that happens, show that those rents were reduced, the utility allowance was implemented, and that we can test for that if we need to. If your utility allowance goes up and your rents go down, that still has to, yeah, that's the way that works. My brain always has to adjust there. That is still something that we have to be able to say, yes, it was implemented. And some of that is the way that our rule is written. It requires the unit status report to be updated. So if you're layered with another program that requires it at the time of recertification, you're going to want to be sure that for our reporting, you are updating the unit status report at the time that that new utility allowance goes into effect. A little bit more on the qualifying households. So you're already certifying households for low-income units. That has to continue. You need to make sure that your tenant files contain proper verifications of income and assets and student statuses. Remember that HOTMA changed some of the requirements for income and asset verifications. So the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act of 2016 went into effect January 1st. If you have not attended an income determination training thus far this year, I would encourage you to do so. We have one on August the 1st that we're going to present. And we did one earlier in January that's recorded and on our website if you need a reference in the meantime. This is something that it did impact some pieces, and it is going to be something that you're all going to need to be aware of, because it's going to affect how we monitor and how you guys are income qualifying your households. The department's income certification form still has to be completed at the time of move-in or initial certification, unless your development is layered with a rural housing program or a project-based HUD program, in which case that program certification could be used. All of our forms can be found online at the compliance forms website there. Rents still have to remain restricted even though you are post 15. Going post 15 does not mean you can charge whatever you want to for rent. There are still rent limits that apply to this, just like there are income limits that apply to your property. The tenant paid portion of rent plus the applicable utility allowance must not exceed the applicable limit. At this point, it does shift to where the corrective action is going to require a refund or a credit of the excess rent that was collected. Any additional income and rent restrictions as defined in the land use restriction agreement are going to remain in effect. So remember, I said if you've got 30% units, Those still have to be occupied by 30% households, and the rent has to be restricted at 30%. So back to the utility allowance a little bit. After the federal compliance period, all utilities are accounted for in the utility allowance. Remember, phone, cable, and internet are not utilities, those are amenities. So we're talking about gas, electric, water, sewer, and trash, if those are tenant paid. Regardless of how the utility is calculated, whether you use actual use or allocation method, it needs to be in the utility allowance. So if water and sewer right now are billed on an allocation method, and you are counting that as a mandatory fee right now, and you go post 15 in December, then January 1, that water and sewer needs to be included in the utility allowance. If you do not have approval to charge water and sewer, I am not telling you that you can begin charging water and sewer the day after you go post 15. You have to get approval for that, so that's still going to be a request you need to make to the department. For the TCAP, Exchange, Bond, and Texas Housing Trust Fund programs that are layered on developments with housing tax credits that go post 15, this will also be how the utility allowance is handled for that program. The federally funded programs like Home and National Housing Trust Fund, all of our MFDL programs, those have already required that all utilities be accounted for in the utility allowance. So that is not going to shift for those because that would have already been the way it works. The utility allowance, except for the PHA method, must be submitted to the department annually for review by October 1st of each calendar year. If you use actual use method, it's got to be submitted by August 1st, which is just a couple weeks away. So you want to make sure you're working on that if you haven't already got that in, if you use actual use. But if you use written local estimate, engineering consumption model, or energy consumption model, or the HUD utility schedule model, that has to be submitted by October 1st. If you use the PHA method, you are required to periodically check with the PHA to determine if they've released a new schedule. So if you check with them once a quarter and they tell you in October that they still have they're still using the same 2023 schedule and they've not released a new one, but you check in January and they did release a new one just within days of you talking to them, you're going to need to kind of scurry and get that implemented so that you can implement it within the 90 days as required by the rules. Are there any questions? Okay. So additional rent and occupancy, I know I've touched on this. This is where I'm talking about if you've got 30%, 40%, 50% in addition to your 60%. These are a few examples of what that might look like in your land use restriction agreement. And these are kind of in from different generations of LURAs. You can see that top one is what it looks like currently. It's a very clean, clear, and concise table. It tells you you have 3 units at 30%, and you have 8 units at 50%, and 29 units at 60%. So that's easy to identify. The next one tells you that 40 of the units have to be at 50%. That means the remaining units that are required for the housing tax credit program are going to be at 60%. So if that's a 100-unit property, then the other 60, if it's 100% development, the other 60 are going to be at 60% AMI, where the 40 that are outlined here are going to be at 50% AMI. The next one is a paragraph form, kind of back to elementary school where we've got math problems that are written out. So you can see it's kind of the same thing. Nobody's at 30%, nobody's at 40%, 80 units are at 50%. Anything remaining under the housing tax credit program would be at the 60% limit. Some LURA requirements that you might see, we talked about this a little bit at the very beginning, about how we're going to know if we have a longer state required compliance period. This is the federal compliance period doesn't get extended, it's 15 years. But for state requirements like supportive services, special needs, HUB, nonprofit, elderly preference or elderly developments, those might be dictated by this longer compliance period here. You can see in that first one that it's 15-year compliance period and 15 additional years for a 30-year affordability period. The next one is just like the example we looked at earlier, where it's got 5 years added to the end. So a 15-year federal compliance period a 15-year additional period, and then an extra 5 years after that. The next one, however, has a compliance period of 25 years. So if you have supportive services required throughout your compliance period, that means you're doing those for 25 years. You're not doing those for 15 years. So you want to be sure that your on-site staff and whoever you work with for your supportive services or any other requirements throughout the compliance period are aware of that, and they know that they're expected to do this for 25 years and not just 15. The last one, it's still a term of 40 years, but you can see that the compliance period is only going to be 15 years. So that means the 25-year piece is going to be added to the affordability period. So it's got an extended affordability period with an extra 10 years. If your land use restriction agreement does not have a box that looks like this, or the box is not checked, then you don't have a longer compliance period or extended use period. You have 15-year federal compliance period, 15-year extended use period for a total of 30 years. Some things that will not stop being monitored. You will still have to conduct all of your affirmative marketing requirements. And if you are required to market to veterans, that is going to continue being a requirement. Those two things do not stop just because you've gone post-15. And your rent and occupancy restrictions are going to continue to be monitored as outlined in the land use restriction agreement. So you can see here the marketing to veterans as required. It does not say throughout the compliance period or throughout the term, so it's throughout the whole term. So when the LURA requires this, you will do it until the property is no longer in the tax credit program. If your LURA does not require this, you are not required to market to veterans. You can if you want to, but you are not required to. And it's not something we would look for during a monitoring review. But if you are in year 18 and you do not send us marketing to veterans, and it is required in your land use restriction agreement, that would be cited as an issue of non-compliance during the monitoring review. Here are some examples of different things that could be impacted by the longer compliance period in the LURA. You can see the elderly preference development example at the top says throughout the term. The elderly limitation says throughout the term. But that bottom example says throughout the compliance period. So we've got two different things that might come in our land use restriction agreement. So knowing what's in your land use restriction agreement is going to be the key to a lot of these things. Here is the nonprofit information. For the nonprofit on the left, you can see that there are two different options depending on what your LURA is determined with the ownership and asset management conversation that happens at the very beginning. So when you go post-15, you're talking about stuff that happened 15, 16, 17 years prior, depending on when the property got funded and the LURA got recorded. So it's not necessarily something that the owner is thinking about right now. They were thinking about it at the very beginning, and maybe they were in the competitive 9% run and they needed to be more competitive. So they said, we'll have a nonprofit throughout the whole term. So that's where that bottom one, you can see throughout the extended use period. And then those other two are just going to be throughout the compliance period. So if we are coming out in year 16, 17, 18, we are not going to look for the nonprofit if the LURA only requires throughout the compliance period. But if it's required throughout the term, we are going to continually monitor for the nonprofit at any time that we monitor the property. The same thing is going to be true for the hub. It may be throughout the term, or it may be throughout the compliance period. And this is going to be something that's outlined in the land use restriction agreement. And this is something that if your hub changes or your nonprofit changes, there has to be a LURA amendment. So you would need to go through the asset management process to get that land use restriction agreement amended. That is not something that you can just decide, oh, well, this LT Valley Electrical Services is no longer our hub. We're going to pick somebody else. You would have to have gone through a LURA amendment process to get that hub or nonprofit changed. Supportive services, in most of our newer land use restriction agreements, these are going to be required throughout the term of the LURA. not just throughout the compliance period. But you still need to look for the language. If it says through the extended use period or it doesn't have a time frame, then it's throughout the whole term. If it says throughout the compliance period, then it's only going to be through that first through that federal compliance period or the compliance period prescribed in the LURA. You can see here that some of these LURAs have a requirement for additional outreach and education. This does not have a required term, so we are going to look for this every time we monitor the development. Special needs, some of these have a throughout the compliance period sentence. Some of these have a throughout the term. Some of these don't have a designation at all as to how long it's going to last. So you would need to make sure that they last throughout the entire affordability period. This particular example is just through the compliance period. So if you have a 24-year or 25-year compliance period, we're going to always monitor during that 25 years to make sure that you have at least 5% of the units for persons with special needs. Are there any questions on the LURA stuff? Okay. So lease requirements outlined in 10.613 are still going to remain in effect. You still have to have an addendum that shows that the owner will not evict without good cause. The addendum still has to say that the owner will not lock out or threaten to lock out or seize or threaten to seize personal property of a resident. You still have to comply with VAWA requirements. You still need a lease addendum that requires households to report changes in student status. And you still have to post and provide the tenant rights and resources guide as required in that statute. The annual requirements do change when you go post 15. Once a calendar year, owners must continue to collect and maintain current data on each household. And you've got to have the household certify who the members are, what their ages are, ethnicity and race. Those can be, they can elect to not provide those. They need to provide the disability status, the student status. If there are rental amounts and rental assistance, they need to include that. You can do this on the department's annual eligibility certification form or the income certification form or the HUD income certification or the USDA income certification. If you have other programs that require you fully certify your household, you are conducting annual data collection. If you don't have other programs and you are just tax credit, and maybe you have markets and you had to do full income certifications in the beginning, but now you've gone post 15, you can switch to just the AEC. But if your owner or syndicator or management company says, no, you cannot switch to the AEC, we still want full income certifications, then you keep doing that. They are the ones that are your employers and they are allowed to be more restrictive. They are allowed to continue that. And maybe the owner is planning to get more funding. Maybe they're planning to do an acquisition rehab, or maybe they're planning to get a resyndication of funds. You don't know what's going on the back end. So best to just continue to do what they are asking you to do and continue to do it correctly. If you continue doing full income certifications, they should be done correctly. They should be done timely, but you no longer need to change the income on the unit status report because now it's post 15. We are not going to look at those income changes necessarily. But again, if there are other program requirements, then you might still have to be updating the unit status report or updating that information. Some other changes to monitoring. The student restrictions of the code are no longer monitored in the same way. An income qualified household consisting entirely of full-time students may occupy a low-income unit without meeting an exception. However, the development may not begin to market to students. It may not rebrand as a student development. And you may not have more than 15% of your units leased to full-time student households. You are going to want to track this. This does not mean that if you are a phase 1 and a phase 2 and everybody's gone post 15, you can put all your student households in one phase, which might go over that 15%, and none of them in the other phase. You cannot do that. That is going to be an issue of non-compliance for the phase that went over that 15%. So you want to be sure that you're still tracking this on an independent property or program status. All households, regardless of income level or 8609 elections, can transfer throughout the property, and the units will swap status. The move-in date is going to stay the same on the unit status report because you are transferring now within a project. So the move-in date is not the transfer date. The move-in date was the original date they were qualified for the project. The file should indicate that they transferred on such and such date. The annual data collection requirements or recertification requirements still have to be done in accordance with that initial move-in date. So if they moved in February of a year, you go post 15, and now all of a sudden they want to move and it's August, you still have to annually recertify them in February, but you don't have to certify them to move to a new unit within the property in August. The department is going to monitor, we are not going to monitor the application fee after the federal compliance period is over, but you should maintain that as a reasonable application fee. Your tenants do call us, they do complain, they do let us know when they think you guys are being unreasonable. Please don't make us add something to the rule that would make us monitor this longer. I think so far y'all are doing good at this, and this is not an issue, but please don't start making those, $300 application fees. Please remember that all student household members need to be screened for student-related income like financial aid. That was a change with the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act, or HOTMA, and that needs to be screened on your application. If you're using our application, it does this. If you're using the Texas Apartment Association application and their supplement, that has been updated as well. For mixed income developments, you are no longer required to conduct annual income certifications. Owners must continue to collect and report data on each household that includes the number of household members, ages, ethnicity, race, disability status, student status, and rental amounts and rental assistance if there is any. This information can be conducted or collected on the annual eligibility certification, which is available on our forms website. Or you can use an income certification form if you're layered with another program or you want to continue doing full income certifications, or if you have a project-based funding source like HUD, project-based Section 8, or rural housing, you can use those certification forms as well. If your property is layered with another program that requires annual income certifications, then you must continue to comply with those requirements. So if you are housing tax credit and home, and your home requires annual certifications during certain years, you still have to do those. You don't have to for your tax credit. I would encourage you to do an AEC in addition, so that if something's late on that full income certification, you don't end up with a tax credit non-compliance issue. You could just limit it to the other program. But that is an ownership management company decision. That is not something that we require. Do we have any questions to go over right now? Okay,
We do.
Perfect.
We have, should an annual student certification form still be used if you're post 15?
Yes, you should be certifying, or the household should be telling you if they are a student or not. So I am always going to suggest that you do a student certification form annually. And if you've got a household that's got a part-time student in it, I would encourage you to do that semester by semester. You would not need to, if you're 100% tax credit, or if you're post 15 and you don't have to do the annual income certifications, their student financial aid is not going to matter after that initial certification, but their student status, if they become a full-time student household, you still need to know about that, because you need to be aware so that you can track that 15% number. The other thing that we see a lot, since this kind of came up, is that the annual eligibility certification forms are auto-populated through your operating systems. That is not how that process is supposed to work. You are supposed to have the household fill that form out. So they are telling you, is somebody a student? They are telling you date of birth, race, ethnicity, and student status, so that you can say they have certified to that effect. So have your households complete that. Do not have that printed out from your operating system, because things can change. Student statuses can change, probably race and ethnicity and disability status. Well, I guess disability status could also change, but race and ethnicity might not. But it's still up to that household to submit that to you annually and certify that. Do we have any other questions before we keep going?
Does the AEC qualify as a student cert?
If the household is filling that out and they are telling you that they're not all students and you don't have any reason to think that they're fibbing on that, then yes, I would accept that as a student cert. If you're doing a full income certification or you have project-based Section 8 or rural housing on top of this, I would encourage you to do a secondary one because your certification is going to be something that's populated through your operating system. And so you want to be sure that there is an opportunity for that household to specifically read the student requirements and answer those questions. That get us caught up?
I think so.
Okay. So a lot of you probably think, oh, we don't have to worry about compliance anymore because nothing gets reported to the IRS because the federal compliance period is over. That is not the right frame of thought. It is important to maintain compliance even after your federal compliance period is over. Even though we don't report on Forms 8823, you are still going to be responsible for those issues of non-compliance. If they are not corrected during the corrective action period, they can impact a previous participation review and might be relevant during the with the enforcement or debarment rules. Additionally, if the development is awarded acquisition or rehab funds or it's got a resyndication of funds, it is going to be expected to comply with the new award and the existing land use restriction agreement. So if they have different designations as set-asides in your land use restriction agreement and your older LURA is more restrictive than your new LURA, you've still got to comply with that older LURA until it goes, until that term is satisfied. So I had somebody reach out to me not too long ago where the existing LURA had requirements for half the units to be at 50% and half at 60%, and the new LURA was all at 60%. You still, when we monitor that property for the full term of that first LURA, we're going to look for half units at 50% AMI and half of the units at 60% AMI. Unless specifically noted in 10.623, all the other requirements of the TINTAC, the LURA, and Section 42 of the tax code remain in effect for the extended use period. The post-15 monitoring rules only apply to housing tax credit developments administered by the department. Participation in other programs administered by the department may require additional monitoring to ensure compliance with the requirements of those programs. Tax credit is the only program that has a post-15 designation or kind of period. Other programs don't have that. So if you call and say, hey, my 100% housing trust fund went post-15, that's not a thing for 100% housing trust fund unless it is layered with the tax credit post-15. And then there's some different things that go there that we can talk about if you have that at your property. But the post-15 allowances and adjustments are for the tax credit program. So if you are 100% tax credit and 100% neighborhood stabilization program, and you go post-15 on your tax credit side, you didn't on your NSP program. So you still have to meet those requirements for both programs. The enforcement action piece that we kind of see more of this, I would think, on post-15 developments. Amy might be able to tell me if I'm fibbing on that. But the enforcement committee asked that we keep this information in because they feel like sometimes the importance of the referrals fall off after the initial compliance period. So some suggestions to help avoid enforcement action. Make sure that the development is meeting all calendar reporting deadlines, like the quarterly vacancy report and the annual owner's compliance report. They have due dates. Those due dates do not move. If you call us on April 28th and say, oh my gosh, I forgot to do the AOCR, can I have an extension? Our answer is going to be no, because it's always due April 30th. If April 30th is on a Sunday, It's still due by April 30th. So make those adjustments every year. Those dates do not move for those two reporting requirements. You want to be sure that CMTS is checked regularly to ensure that TDHCA correspondence is not accidentally missed or overlooked. And you want to make sure that physical inspection deadlines and file inspection deadlines are calendared and adhered to. I would encourage you to have, and there are 3 allowed contacts in CMTS, one for a management site, an on-site management, one for a management company, and one for an owner. I would encourage you to have 3 different people with 3 different email addresses set up in there. What happens when somebody goes on vacation and we notify the property that we're going to do a monitoring review, and the person that got notified is on vacation, but you only have that one person set up in CMTS, nobody else knows about it, we're still coming. And if that person took a 3-week vacation to the Galapagos Islands, that's going to potentially mean that nobody knew about the on-site review, and we show up and nothing got submitted ahead of time, that sort of a thing. So you want to be sure that somebody is monitoring that CMTS attachment system. Failure to resolve noncompliance within the corrective action period will result in a referral for an administrative penalty and or debarment. That is outlined in the TINTAC Chapter 2. Responsible parties in control who have a referral ratio of 50% or more of actively monitored developments being referred to the Enforcement Committee within the last 3 years will be referred for debarment in accordance with the TINTAC Chapter 2, Section 401, little e2, big A. Some additional items of note if you do get called in for enforcement action. Don't ignore the referral letter. Don't wait for legal to contact you. The best thing to do after getting a notice of penalty referral or a letter that says you're being referred because this was not corrected timely or was not corrected fully during the corrective action period, contact the monitor, contact Isela Caseman. Her email address is listed there. Upload the corrections into CMTS. There is also going to be a form called the Owner Acknowledgement of Referral that's going to be uploaded with the letter of notifying you that you've been referred. That is going to have to be signed by the owner, not an owner's agent, but the actual owner, and that has to be uploaded into CMTS as well. You also want to look at the internal management policies to ensure that similar referrals do not occur again. When I sit in on the enforcement action meetings, I'm sometimes there as a resource, or if it's a property that I monitored, I'm not part of the decision-making factor. I'm just there as a resource for somebody to ask questions if they need to. But one of the questions that the Enforcement Committee asks is, what are you going to do to make sure that this doesn't happen going forward? So make sure that if you get referred once, that's it, that you make those changes and you make those adjustments to your practices and policies and procedures so that it doesn't happen again. Taking these steps immediately could help the owner avoid penalty action in many cases, and taking these steps proactively instead of waiting until you get a referral could help avoid referrals altogether. We would also encourage you to continue attending training when you go post-15. Don't just say, oh, I'm post-15, none of this matters anymore. I just have to skate through the next 15 years and then I'm done completely. There's a lot of things that change. This is a moving target with regards to eligibility and the way that things work, especially after HOTMA came out. You know, we've all been doing it one way for a very long time. HOTMA kind of changed a lot of that. And so you want to be sure that you're aware of those changes and you're paying attention to the announcements that we send out. Anytime I do a training, I'm going to send out an announcement. Our great web liaison team helps with that. Anytime we do a training with the Texas Apartment Association, there's going to be an announcement that goes out. If you are not subscribed to receive our announcements, please visit our website, scroll all the way to the bottom, click the yellow subscribe button so that you can subscribe to those. You can also be notified when there is an application for new funding in your area, or when a property in your area is applying for new funds. There's a lot of different resources there that you can do as far as the subscription goes there. We also maintain a YouTube channel, and a lot of the department, or a lot of the divisions here at the department, post to the YouTube channel. So there's some fair housing trainings there. Our trainings go there. Some other other divisions post there as well. That is going to be a great resource for you. The department has a number of previously recorded trainings and their applicable handouts available on our website. I do try to keep those updated. We did a post-15 training, I think it was 2 years ago. That will come down now, and this one will replace it because now this one has current information in it, whereas the old one might be a little bit outdated, even though there might not have been a lot that changed. I don't want somebody looking at an older training and missing the mark on something when stuff has changed. So we do try to keep that page current and up to date with the most recent offering of that webinar. That is all I have today about the housing tax credit after the federal compliance period. I think the Longhorn has definitely seen a shadow. We've got lots more summer left to go. So if you're new to Texas, stay tuned. It just gets hotter. Amy, did you have anything you wanted to add? Are there any questions, comments? I felt like this one was going to go fast, but okay. We can stay in this frame of thought for next fewish minutes and then switch gears to the open forum. If nobody has questions, you can always reach out to us by email if you would like to ask questions later, or if you have property specific questions, if you want us to take a peek at your 8609s or your land use restriction agreement to make sure that you're on the right track as far as the when you go post 15 or how long your compliance period is, if there's a longer compliance period prescribed through the LURA. That is all. We are happy to do that. That is something that we can look at with you. I see nothing coming through. Full disclosure, we did do this one as a lighter topic or a more specific topic because it is summer and I didn't want to do the big heavy hitting topics while folks were on vacations and stuff. Do you want me to tell them what we have coming training wise?
Yeah.
So we have developed, you guys, we have heard you, you have shouted it from the rooftops. There is a bond specific training coming soon, hopefully within the next couple of months. That's going through some internal review stuff, but that is going to be coming. So watch for that. We have a housing tax credit training at the end of August through the Texas Apartment Association. We will be doing our August office hours topic is going to be utility allowances. So if you need a refresher on that or want to talk through or watch me complete a HUD model, that is going to be the time to be there for that. And that registration information should go out today or Monday. The other information will go out for the other trainings kind of as they become available and are posted. We try to do those 30 days out. I guess we can go ahead and take kind of a break till about 10:05 and then
We'll start open forum.
Yeah, we can start open forum and then our other folks can join us as we,
yeah.
Yep. All right, so seeing no other questions, no chat, nothing. I saw a couple people fall off. If you are leaving us right now, we thank you for joining us today. There will be a survey that pops up. Please complete that. That is how I know if you enjoyed this or if I missed the mark or what questions we didn't answer or what trainings you would like to see in the future. But if you're staying with us for office hours, you do not have to hop off. I am going to stop the recording and we will take a 5-minute break so that Amy and I can stretch our legs and refill our waters, and we will come back and go ahead and start office hours a little early today.